Good morning, students. Today we are going to have the line by line explanation of the lesson The Portrait of a Lady, written by Khushwant Singh. The lines from the textbook are: My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Dear students, let us have some of the word meanings of the passage. Wrinkled means here having lines or folds. Portrait means here painting or picture. Mantelpiece means a structure of wood, marble, or stone above and around a fireplace. The thought was almost revolting means it was very hard for the author to believe. Revolting means here unpleasant. Absurd means illogical. Undignified means disrespectful. Fables means fictitious stories with a moral teaching. Prophets means here saints. Now we are going to have the explanation of the above passage in a very simple words for your better understanding to the topic. The author talks about his grandmother. He had known her for the past 20 years and she had always been old and wrinkled. He was old that she was once young. It means he was told that she was once young and pretty and had a husband. His grandfather's portrait hung on the wall, in which he wore a loose fitted clothes, a turban, and had a long white colored beard that reached his chest. He also appeared very old, and the author thought that he was someone who could have many grandchildren but not a wife or children. The author could never imagine that once his grandmother was young and pretty. He could not connect to this idea. She used to tell him and his cousins about her childhood memories, like the games she used to play as a child. They found these stories illogical and disrespectful because it was beyond their imagination to think that grandmother was once a child and played such games. They thought that her life's stories were like the other moral stories which she used to tell them. So, this is the explanation. Further, she had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. So, these are the lines from the textbook. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older, and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of a rosary. Her silver locks were scattered, locks means her hair, scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Dear students, here there are some meanings of the words. Crisscross means a pattern of intersecting straight lines. Hobbled means walked in an awkward way. Spotless white means she wore clean white colored dresses. Stoop means bend one's body forward. Rosary means here a string of beads for keeping count of number of chants made of a religious prayer. Locks means here hair. Scattered means disorganized. Untidily means not neat. Puckered means a face contract into wrinkles. Inaudible, unable to be heard. Serenity means the state of being peaceful and calm. An expanse of pure white serenity means refers to the calm, relaxed, and peaceful character of the author's grandmother. Contentment means a state of happiness and satisfaction. So, dear students, let us have the explanation of the above passage in a very simple words. His grandmother was short, fat, slightly bent in posture, and her face had lots of wrinkles. She seemed so old, and she had been the same for the past 20 years. According to the author, she was beautiful but not pretty. So, dear students, you have to just understand here what is the difference between being beautiful and being pretty. Okay, the author has differentiated over here. She walked around the house in an awkward way, wearing spotless white clothes with beads of the rosary hanging from one hand, and the other hand rested on her back for support. She had silver colored hair, which was not neatly combed and was disorganized. She was constantly chanting prayers. Chanting prayers means reciting prayers. He compares her to the winter landscape in the mountains, which has a peaceful and calm feel. She was a live example of a pure white peace, emitting entirety. So, dear students, let us have some more lines from the textbook, which are here. My grandmother and I were good friends. So, here you are going to have the true relationship between the author and his grandmother. So, there was not such a kind of relation, but this was the relation of being true friends. So, I think, hope everybody should develop this kind of intactness between grandson and grandparents, okay, or granddaughters and grandparents. So, nowadays it is the earnest need of the time, okay. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I could listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle, and hand it to me. After a breakfast of a thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Dear students, let us have some word meanings. Monotonous means here dull and boring. Bothered means to be concerned. Fetch means go for and then bring back something for someone. Slate means here a flat plate or slate. of a slate formerly used for writing on in schools, in primary schools especially. Plastered means covered with a layer of plaster. Earthen means made of baked or fired clay. Stale means no longer fresh and pleasant to eat, hard, musty, or dry. Dear students, let us have the explanation of the above passage. The author lived with her in the village. They were good friends. His parents left him with her to settle in the city. The author's grandmother used to wake him up every morning and get him ready for school. She would recite her morning prayers while she bathed and dressed him up, and he loved her voice, but would not try to memorize a word of what she spoke. She would make his things ready, like a wooden slate, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen. He would eat a thick stale chapati with butter and sugar spread on it. So this is Indian food even nowadays. Sometimes in some families, some children they love it. So they both used to walk to school, and his grandmother carried stale chapatis with her to feed the village dogs. So this was the routine of life. Further, my grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. These are the lines from the textbook. The priest taught us the alphabet and morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda, singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus. Chorus means here together. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Scripture means the holy things, for example, prayers written on the walls. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. We miss here that the author himself as well as his grandmother. So this time the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. Sent for us means called for. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. So, these are the lines of the textbook. So, dear students, let us have some of the meanings. Scriptures means here the sacred writings of a religion, it means holy things. Growling means making a low guttural sound in the throat. Courtyard means veranda over here. Explanation of the above passage is his grandmother would accompany him to the school as the temple was attached to the school, and she used to visit the temple daily. On one side, he would sit on the veranda with other children, would sing the alphabet and prayers in the chorus. Chorus means here unison. On the other hand, she would sit in the temple to read the scriptures, means holy prayers. After finishing, they would walk back home together. The village dogs met them at the village door. They would follow them to their home, growling and fighting with each other for the stale chapatis that she fed them. When his parents got settled in the city, they called them. That was the turning point of his friendship with his grandmother. They shared the same room, but she no longer would give him company to his school. It means grandmother was not going to school with the author in the city. He started going to an English medium school, and a motor bus would come to pick and drop him. There were no dogs in the streets whom she could feed as she did in the village. So she started feeding sparrows in the veranda of their house. So dear students, let us have only these explanations till today, and further explanations will be made in the next classes tomorrow onwards for the better understanding. Thank you, students.